Thank you very much, Matt. And just as I hope, both speakers have done an outstanding job and have left us time for discussion. Now, since this is being taped, work with us, and Chris is going to bring a microphone around, and we'll try to get just to as many questions as possible. And Dennis and Matt, just come on up, and we'll switch these microphones around as needed. So raise your hand, and the first one that Chris gets to, we'll ask the first question. Okay.
We've got a question here.
Dennis, with the two treatment studies in Michigan State and Nebraska, were the amount of residuals that were left in each pasture equivalent? So for the daily moves, were they kind of doing that take half, leave half principle? And with the mob grazing, were they actually, even if they were leaving half, stomping half, were they leaving kind of the same amount? The one picture I saw, which I think was Michigan State, looked like the mob grazing was taking it completely down to the ground, and I was just wondering if those residuals were the same.
Yeah, great question, Dan. I'll repeat it for the benefit of the YouTube audience. So the question was, what's the difference in the residuals in those treatments, in particular, I guess, in the Michigan study, but maybe in the others as well, and what are they leaving in terms of a grazing residual there in those experimental treatments? And by the way, those pictures that you referred to are other locations, not from that location. So let me just make that clear for those that may be looking at that online as well. So the general sense was they were shooting for about a 60% utilization on almost all of those studies. I'd have to go back and look at exactly on all of them, but I think I recall, especially in the Michigan study, that they were looking for a 60% utilization, and that included disappearance and trampling. Okay, so that was their target. I think they were hitting right around 55 or something like that from recollection. So that's not really taking off too much. There are situations where I've seen utilization much higher than that. You and I saw some of that the other day, actually, on someone else's farm. It was far more than that, and using a lot more and leaving a lot less. But so yeah, it was looking at about 60%, and that's what most of those studies have been shooting for, is around 60%.
Okay, who has the next question?
Matt, you mentioned that some of your animals are in a meat production mode. I think most of the discussion we've seen has been a cow-calf operation. What's the general observation that you would make for us for those that are dealing with the meat production side for steers, for example?
Okay, so yes, so if you study the nutritive value of that forage that we have in these systems where we let it stockpile for a long time, especially in the South, we've got some warm season stuff in there, it is not going to be anywhere near what we need to grow cattle. I mean, to grow cattle at 2-3 pounds a day. And so we, in my own personal management, we manage the growing cattle, the finishers, much differently than we do the cow herd. They're actually, we run our finishers on a separate farm, and I manage those myself, and we move them every 2 to 3 days, and we come back around about 3 times a year. So we're, you know, it's certainly not quite what you do with rotational grazing, typically a little bit longer rest time, usually around 60 days, but still pretty good quality forage when we get in there, and we really try to maintain that pretty high level of green. We try to control seed heads and that sort of thing.
Okay, we have another question.
Right here.
Man, on that stockpile fescue in the summertime, especially the novel fescues, is there any data that it has better survivability, treating it like that versus rotational grazing?
Not that I'm aware of, Bjorn, and we might ask, since Chris Teutsch has got the microphone, and he's the one that really did some work with that. I don't believe that there's any, you know, we need a lot more data with these novel fescues in terms of their survivability and their, you know, how they're stressed by management. I know we can overgraze them a lot easier than we than we can toxic fescue, and so there are some concerns about that. But Chris, did you notice anything about stand survival in those? I know you did some of that for several years.
So we did a study for 2 years. We didn't notice survival, but I think the key to managing those novel endophytes is that you just can't put the animals in and leave them there. You have to leave about a 50% residual to protect those stands during the summer months. And I think that's going to be critical if you're trying to graze a full season grass stand in the summer months and you just don't graze them too tight. You got to leave that residual.
Yeah, so just to summarize again for the video audience or the YouTube audience, we do, Chris has noticed that, or he believes that we need to leave quite a bit of residual on those, maybe about a 50% residual during the summer on those fescue stands to keep them from failing or from declining. And this is, again, I'll just add to that, this is one of the reasons why I worry about the very high, this very high intensity kind of management in those situations is, again, 4 or 5 hours can cause overgrazing, and most of us don't have, have a lot of going on and don't quite have the ability to deal with that kind of a rigid system.
I thought I saw a question, hand over here too, Chris, so, okay, next.
Question is, I noticed you had a short-tailed cow. Did you think that came from inside fescue?
Yes, sir. I think most people in the audience would tell you they've got at least one cow like that, and they'll stay in a fall calving herd. Those kind of cows probably would not stay in a spring calving herd around here, but fescue toxicosis is for real, and again, that's why I really will state again, we need a lot more work with the non-toxic fescue systems for conversion and that sort of thing, because it's, it is real. It makes their tails fall off, their ears fall off, and I know extreme cold situation we had a few weeks ago had a lot of calls about lame cows, and that's got to be related to the fescue.
Very good. I want to ask Dennis to comment. I know there was a lot of questions that's come up over the soil health and soil organic matter, soil carbon. But Dennis, you shared a lot of data, but you also did some work in Georgia on that, and I know you probably haven't published, but what was the result of your personal work there in Georgia that I didn't see you cover?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we have looked at some soil carbon development on some of our pasture-based dairies. In particular, Alan Frunzeliber is here somewhere, and he's looked at a lot in the Piedmont station. I don't know if Alan's... Yeah, there he is. Alan has a lot more on beef cattle systems there, and very good look at that over time, and some really great data there too. Now, the pasture-based dairy side, I'll be the first to admit, and first of all, I should point out that that was a soil scientist in our department. I was a party to it, but it was actually his work that did that. And he was looking at basically what's called a chrono sequence, which is over time, over multiple years, as there's a transition from what in this case was cotton and peanut fields that have been row cropped for probably the 30 years prior to that, very intensively with tillage and all that goes along with that. And then converting that over to more or less permanent grassland under irrigation on a dairy, heavily stocked, 2.5 dairy cows to the acre, with fairly high supplementation rates as well, and building soil carbon at the rate of about 3.6 tons of carbon to the acre, which is roughly the equivalent of about 1/3 of a percentage point of organic matter per year. So we were going from roughly about 1%. Over the course of about 3 years, we were at 2%, and I've seen levels as high as 3.5%, 4%, and 4.5% on some of those locations. For the Southeast, that's extremely high. That may not be very high for folks from Iowa, but it's extremely high for us in the very humid Southeast. I believe the native soil organic matter probably was in the neighborhood of about 3.5 or something like that %. So yeah, we've seen some dramatic increases, but again, these are intensively grazed, and frankly, by our definition, some of those would approach mob grazing stocking densities. You're talking 60,000 plus pounds of body weight to the acre for half of a day, and they'd move to a new pasture after every milking, or they would basically strip. They would have have access to the first half and then the other half after the milking. So.
Thank you. And I'm going to get to this other question right up here, Chris, when you get a chance. I want to call your attention. Both speakers, both Dennis and Matt, pointed out tools, using mob grazing as a tool. And the very first experience that I saw with this is that lower picture in the lower left of that screen. It's a little small for the back, but I was just looking at it there and reminded myself I took that picture about 30-something years ago on the South Island of New Zealand, and that's ryegrass, and that's a mob. That's where the term came from, a mob of sheep. They're using that technique, that tool, as a renovation tool, and it does an excellent job, because immediately they have already gone into that paddock that they had just grazed and overseeded it with ryegrass. And also you can see it as tools, using it in cleaning up a lot of brush, looking at Scott's brome, going across there with mobs of sheep, cattle, and then sheep, and they're able to do a lot with that. So excellent tool for certain things, just like another tool in that toolbox. Yes?
Dennis, just following up on your smaller plant planter changes over time, what are the depths to which you're sampling? When we talk about a third of a percentage per year, is that 6-inch depth?
Yeah, so
Depth?
to repeat the question, at what depth were those measurements occurring? And those were at multiple depths to look at that total buildup. But most of that percentage increase that we're seeing from that 1% to 2% on up is it looking at the 4-inch depth. 0 to 4 inch, yep. 0 to 4 inch.
Dennis, can I just ask about the carbon fractions, measure organic matter, because that always seems to be a sticky question when you get into soil scientists, because there's
Yes.
a whole bunch of different
Yeah.
fractions. Are you, when you're reporting the results, is that total carbon, is that like just combustible or carbon in the soil?
Yeah, so to repeat that question, are you looking at various fractions in that? In that particular case, that's looking at total carbon, okay, not the individual fraction.
Like living plant roots or plant roots that are just getting
It was sieved. You'd have to talk with Aaron Thompson, our soil scientist, who was handling that, to get the exact methodology.
We lost a couple of tails on our farm last year too. Would you fellows say that yellow hair coat discoloration on the top of the back on those cows you showed stock for, is that a layman's indication of a fescue issue? Is that a mineral deficiency?
Well, that's a good question. It's probably a little bit of both. The question was, in these cows that have some discoloration across the top of the back, is that minerals? Is it fescue? You know, what is it? And we see that very commonly in fescue-based systems, even where we have really good mineral programs. Now, that's not to say that there may not be some interferences going on in the minerals and that sort of thing, but typically it's not unusual for us to see that in fescue systems, even where we have very good mineral programs.
But we might add, we also have seen that on orchard grass programs and some bluegrass programs. So
Yes.
I agree that there are some situations. Next question.
Yes, in multi-species mob grazing, have you seen some good examples of people actually putting them in the same field at the same time versus following one group of species after the other?
There's nothing in the literature in that, but yeah, the question has to do with multi-species grazing, and is there a benefit for having them all together or one following the other? Is that a fair synopsis of the question?
In particular, most of the time I've seen the multi-species, it is one group following another. But for management purposes of not having so many fields being used at the same time, I'd like to try to do them all at once. But has anybody really been doing that successfully?
Well, doing them all at once in the same pasture is what the Kiwis do very well. In fact, when we were in the South Island back in the fall, we were on several beef and sheep farms, and they run their beef and their sheep together. Sometimes they'll follow one with the other, but a lot of times they're just running in the same pasture. They're just grazing different areas of the pasture. And many of them are going to be doing block grazing, what they call block grazing, which is basically a one-day rotational grazing system that'll be very, very similar to some of what we've already described. So yeah.
A question right over here, Chris, and then we'll come back to the other side.
Dennis, you said that mop grazing increases the soil temperature. So how can I interpret the results? What will be the potential impact of soil?
Okay, so the question was, I cited a study that indicated soil temperature was actually increased in the case of mob grazing. What are the implications of that? Well, one of the claims, I guess, and I probably should have made that a little bit clearer, is one of the claims with mob grazing is that you're leaving a lot more litter there that is insulating or creating a mulch effect that's keeping the soil temperature down, decreasing the amount of water evaporation, and then perhaps also changing the environment for weed germination or other kinds of things. And in that particular study, and that's granted that's the only one that I've seen in the literature where they've actually measured that, it was actually greater under mob grazing than rotational grazing.
In the instance where you saw the cows and sheep not grazing together, what type of fencing system were they using?
Oh, great. So the question was, what kind of fencing system were they using in where they were using multi-species grazing with sheep and beef cows together? Actually, I've got some photos later on I'll be happy to share with you. I think I took a couple thousand photos while I was, literally a couple thousand photos while we were in New Zealand between me and my graduate student. Essentially, what they're usually running in that situation is a hot wire, one hot wire, really hot. Usually it's a turbo wire, poly wire, not poly tape, and it will be a little bit lower. Sometimes you would see two strands. Usually it's just one. All of their, in many cases, all of the interior fence is electric fence, poly wire. All of the exterior fence is very overkill in terms of perimeter fence. One of the things interesting, and this is getting off the track a little bit, but just to share, is that many of the boundary fences there in New Zealand have battens every meter, battens to separate the wires on their high tensile wire on their fence every meter. So you go down the road and you see all these battens down there, you wonder why in the world would they spend so much money on battens? I think a lot of that has to do with history, but it also is interesting as you go around. But all the interior fencing, not all, but a good chunk of the interior fencing is going to be electric poly wire. Some more permanent pastures would be divided up with more permanent fencing, and it would be 3 to 4 strands of high tensile or something like that.
Okay, was there a question over here? While they're getting the next question there, Chris, let me make a comment. Matt talked about a demonstration using chaparral, and if any of you are not familiar with that, I'd like for you to go by the Dow exhibit. Chaparral is a Dow product. It's a herbicide, but Matt was talking about in reference to a property that those of you that were with us last year, Dr. Glenn Aiken talked about to suppress tall fescue seed head production. So if you are not familiar with that, they've got a lot of literature at the Dow booth, so go by there. Now, Chris, where's the next question?
Dr. Ford, when planning for summer testing stuff, is there any chance that specifically timed brief grazing in late spring or early summer would reduce seed head production or improve the quality of vegetation, kind of like flipping the seed heads mechanically?
Yes, so absolutely, and I'll just say a little bit more about what we do at home. The problem here is that winter stops and spring starts like suddenly. I mean, there's not a real good transition. So as soon as it warms up, fescue starts trying to put out a seed head pretty quickly. And so years ago, Jim Garish had taught me to get out real early and move very quickly around the landscape. And so that's what we've always tried to do. We turn out when most of our neighbors are still 2-3 weeks before they can turn out. Now, our pastures are usually in a lot better condition. But as soon as we start to see elevated boot stage, the very first elevation on fescue, we really start going and moving fast. And we can get over quite a bit of land, and you can really see the effect of that once we get into the summer. So those areas we get those seed heads bit off when they're in the boot stage, and cattle will really eat them very aggressively at that time. That's really good. Those become very vegetative during the summer. Now, the pasture that I showed you is one that we've oftentimes cut for hay because we never could, we get that early out thing, but we never could get over all of it. And so what we couldn't get over, we typically would go ahead and cut that part for hay. And so we started several years ago using seed head suppression with chaparral on that particular pasture or on pastures like that. And that's kind of what our plan was for this year. Unfortunately, when April 15th came, we were dry as a bone, and that pasture was not growing, and really our concern about, we need to know more about the chaparral thing. It can be too effective, if you're in a situation where the growth conditions are not good for the plant. So we did not seed head suppress those. We ended up getting a lot of rain in May and June, and so we still did get a pretty good healthy crop of seed heads. And looking back, I wish that I knew whether the right thing to have done in that situation was to suppress seed heads, but I don't know that. But that's our plan with our summer stockpile. We do plan to continue to do that because I'm not going to go back to making hay and killing myself all spring like I used to do. So we are going to continue to do that, and we will use that seed head suppression as part of that summer stockpiling system, just because I do have that concern about the toxins, and we know that that can have a pretty big lowering effect on toxin loads.
Okay, we'll take one more, or go ahead.
Yes, absolutely, Gary. And I think that so the question is, what is the comparison between summer stockpiling fescue versus going ahead and putting in a warm season, native warm season, or even Bermuda grass or something like that in our world? And I do think that either one is an option. I still have this concern about the toxins, and I think the right thing to do is to get cattle off of fescue for the worst part of the summer, off toxic fescue. And so I think that's that really makes me promote the idea of a warm season in there. Now you can, again, we have to have a reality check when we start thinking about our farmers and how they work. The reason that we do it on our farm is that we have not, I have just not had time or energy to do the conversion to a native warm season. But my long-term plan is to do that. So we do need, I do believe we do need some warm season grasses in these systems, and many of our cooperators we work with that have a little more time to devote to it than I do are taking that approach. So get up in the Shenandoah Valley, it's all fescue, it really does well there, and part of the strategy, I think, with what they're doing there is to get farmers to do, go that first step, go that next step, and you may realize, well, this is better than it was, better than making hay, but I still need maybe some warm season component.
We've got a tight schedule. We got a business meeting coming up in 15 minutes, but I want to take this question back here, and I know there's still some that come and talk to the speakers afterwards. So, Chris, question.
Thank you. Maybe this will wrap it up nicely for us all, but as a representative of small cow-calf producers in a southeastern state, how do we answer this question of this session today? Is mob grazing a tool or a toolbox? Please choose one.
What? You want me to do it? Clear. That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I want to make sure that no one leaves this room with any other idea than it is a tool and only a tool. If you make it a toolbox, you're going to get in trouble. And all of us have seen some real train crashes when that was occurred. When it becomes the toolbox and you throw out everything else from pest control to everything else on management, I believe you need to forget it. Now, I may be a bit biased, but that's my opinion, and I'm going to stick with it. Do y'all disagree with that? Okay, but thanks for setting that question up. And folks, I appreciate you coming. This has been the largest crowd we've ever had, and I hope the organizers and the program committee see that. I was challenged to know what topic, but I'm glad we chose this, and I'm glad you came, and I hope you weren't disappointed. Now, the business meeting will start in 15 minutes. What room? Somebody tell me what room? Black Mountain room. Buck Mountain, okay, Buck Mountain. It's right next to the Black Mountain. If you find one, you'll find both. Okay, go ahead. We'll see y'all later.
This was the best symposium. This was by far the best symposium we've ever had.
I wasn't sure how we were going to do it, but you got standing room only.
Yeah, it was great.
Now, you take care. I don't know what you're doing. I'll get my thumb drive out of there. Yes, sir.